Welcome back to Gentle Tales with Granny. They say a dog's loyalty has no limits and its memory has no end. Tonight, I'll take you to a small station where a scruffy dog has been waiting for 20 years. But he isn't waiting for a train, he's waiting for a miracle. Let's head to Shadow-on-Mist Station. Shadow-on-Mist Station was a place where time seemed to stop. The trains were modern and fast, but the stones were old and cold. It was a place of departures and arrivals, of hurried goodbyes and tearful hellos. And in the middle of it all was Barnaby. Barnaby was a dog of no particular breed, but of a very particular purpose. He was scruffy, with ears that flopped at different angles and eyes that looked like polished amber. Every day, at exactly 8 o'clock, he would sit beneath the great station clock. He didn't bark at the passengers. He didn't beg for scraps. He simply watched. He watched the businessmen with their briefcases. He watched the students with their books. He watched every single face that stepped off the train, searching for a ghost. One day, a journalist named Sarah got stuck at the station due to a delayed train. She had an eye for a story, and Barnaby was the best story she'd ever seen. She watched as people offered him ham, bread, and even biscuits. Barnaby would wag his tail, but he wouldn't eat. Then a specific whistle sounded, not from a train, but from an old man walking by. Barnaby's ears perked up. He stood, his tail thumping against the stone floor. For a second, he looked young again. But then the man passed, and Barnaby sat back down. The light in his eyes faded. Sarah was hooked. Why that whistle? Why this station? She started asking the locals. The ticket seller shrugged. He's been here longer than I have, he said. Nobody knows where he came from. He just appeared. But Sarah wasn't satisfied with nobody knows. She spent the next 3 days in the town archives. She dug through decades of local news, looking for anything about a dog or a disaster. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and the silence of forgotten lives. And then she found it. It was a headline from 20 years ago. A massive flood had hit the valley. A puppy had been found guarding a small boy on a roof until rescuers arrived. The boy had been taken to the hospital, and the puppy had vanished in the chaos. Sarah looked at the date. The boy in the photo would be a man now. A man who would be 25 or 26. Could it be? Was Barnaby waiting for the boy he saved? But the boy hadn't lived in Shadow-on-Mist for 2 decades. Nobody had. She showed the clipping to the oldest conductor at the station. His eyes widened. I remember that boy, he whispered. His father was the station master. They moved away after the flood. But the dog, we thought the water took him. He stayed, Sarah said. He stayed to wait for his friend. Sarah realized that Barnaby wasn't just a stray. He was a sentinel. He was a living anchor to a moment of pure bravery. He was waiting for the one person who knew his true name. But how could she find a boy who had been gone for 20 years? Sarah didn't just write an article. She made a post. She shared the photo of the hero puppy and the photo of the old dog at the station. She sent it out into the digital wind, hoping it would find the one heart it was meant for. Help me find Barnaby's boy, she wrote. The internet, my dears, can be a cold place. But when it sees a love as pure as a dog's, it turns into a bonfire. Within hours, the story was everywhere. The station dog was viral. People from all over the world were crying for Barnaby. But the one person we needed was still silent. As the sun set on the 3rd day, Barnaby sat by the clock. He looked more tired than usual. He seemed to know that his story was being told, but his heart was still empty. He looked at the tracks, waiting for the train that would never come. Or so he thought. Sarah sat beside him, her hand on his scruffy neck. "We're looking, Barnaby," she whispered. "We're looking. But the ocean of people is vast, and memories are fragile. Would the boy remember the dog who saved him? We'll find out in Chapter 2. Good night, my dears." Memory is a funny thing. It can sleep for years, buried under the noise of a busy life, only to wake up with a single image. To understand why Barnaby is still waiting, we must go back to the day the sky fell. The day of the Great Flood. It had rained for 40 days. The river, usually a gentle ribbon of blue, turned into a brown monster that swallowed the town. Houses were lifted like toys. The station was the highest point, and that's where the children were sent, including 5-year-old Toby and his new puppy, Barnaby. They were trapped on the roof of the station master's house. Toby was crying, terrified by the roar of the water. But Barnaby didn't cry. He sat between the boy and the edge, his tiny puppy heart filled with a giant's courage. He was Toby's only shield. A rescue boat finally reached them. In the chaos, the rescuers could only grab Toby. The water was rising too fast. Toby reached for Barnaby, screaming his name, but the puppy was pushed back by a wave. "We'll come back for him," they lied. But they never did. Toby moved to the city. He grew up, went to school, became an architect. He built tall, strong buildings, perhaps because he never wanted to feel the ground wash away again. He remembered the puppy, of course, but he was told Barnaby hadn't survived. He had mourned him and then he had moved on. Now, 20 years later, Toby sat in his office, his mobile phone buzzing with notifications. He was successful, but there was a quietness in his heart that no building could fill. He was a man who had everything, but felt like he'd left something important behind. He opened a viral post. A photo of an old, scruffy dog at a train station. He almost scrolled past, but then he saw the amber eyes. Those eyes. And beneath it, a photo of a hero puppy from a 20-year-old flood. Toby's breath caught. The coffee cup slipped from his hand. "Barnaby," he whispered. The name felt like a key turning in a long-rusted lock. It couldn't be. Dogs don't live that long. Dogs don't wait that long. But the heart knows what the head denies. Toby didn't call Sarah. He didn't leave a comment. He just grabbed his coat. He booked the first train to Shadow on Mist. He didn't care about his meetings or his deadlines. For the first time in 20 years, he had a destination that mattered. He was going back to the roof. He was going back to the boy he used to be. As the train sped through the countryside, Toby watched the rain on the glass. He felt like he was traveling through time. Every mile brought him closer to a memory he thought was dead. He wondered if Barnaby would even know him. He was a man now, not a boy in a yellow raincoat. Meanwhile, at the station, Barnaby stood up. It was only noon, not 8 o'clock. The station master watched in wonder as the old dog walked to the very edge of the platform. He didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail. He just stood there, his nose twitching in the wind. He could smell the storm. He could smell the past. Barnaby's legs didn't ache anymore. The weight of 20 years seemed to lift from his shoulders. He looked down the tracks, his amber eyes fixed on the horizon. He knew. Before the whistle blew, before the doors opened, he knew his wait was over. The train arrived like a thunderclap. The doors hissed open. A sea of people stepped off, but Barnaby didn't look at them. He was looking at a single man in a dark coat who was standing perfectly still, as if he were made of stone. The world stopped. Their eyes met across the platform. 20 years of silence, 20 years of waiting, all coming down to a single moment. But would Toby find the courage to speak? And would Barnaby find the strength to believe? We'll see the reunion in the final chapter. Good night, my dears. Welcome back for the end of Barnaby's wait. 20 years is a lifetime for a man and forever for a dog. But as Toby stepped onto that platform, the years began to melt away. The architect and the stray were no longer strangers. They were a boy and his puppy once more. Let's see the homecoming. Toby walked like he was in a dream. Every step felt like a mile. He didn't see the crowd. He didn't see the fog. He only saw those amber eyes. Barnaby stood his ground, his tail giving a single, hesitant thump against the stone. He was afraid to hope, but his nose knew the truth. Then Toby spoke. Barnaby, he whispered. At the sound of that voice, the same voice that had read him stories on the roof 20 years ago, Barnaby let out a cry that broke every heart on the platform. It wasn't a bark, it was a sob of relief. The wait was finally over. Toby fell to his knees and pulled the old dog into his arms. He didn't care about his expensive coat. He didn't care about the mud. He buried his face in Barnaby's scruffy neck and wept. I'm here, Barnaby, he sobbed. I'm finally here. I'm so sorry I took so long. The station fell silent. Even the trains seemed to stop their engines in respect. Sarah stood nearby, her camera down, her own eyes wet. She had gone looking for a viral story, but she had found something much more powerful, proof that some threads are simply too strong for time to snap. Toby didn't go back to the city. Not for long. He used his skills as an architect to rebuild his father's old house on the hill. He wanted to fix the place where the story had broken. He hired the local blacksmith, Silas, to forge a new gate, one that would never be locked against a friend again. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the sound of silence in shadow on mist. The town began to breathe again. People who had left after the flood started to return, drawn by the story of the dog who waited. Barnaby wasn't just a pet anymore, he was the soul of the village. Barnaby spent his final years in the warmth of that house. He didn't have to sit under the station clock anymore. He had a soft bed, a full bowl, and the constant presence of the boy he had saved. At night, Toby would sit by the fire and read, and Barnaby would rest his chin on Toby's foot, making sure he was still there. When Barnaby finally passed away, many years later, he did so with his tail wagging. He wasn't afraid of the dark, because he knew he wasn't alone. Toby buried him on the hill, overlooking the station. He placed a statue there, a scruffy dog looking toward the tracks, a monument to the power of a promise. The statue still stands today. Travelers often stop to leave a flower or a stone. It reminds them that in a world that is always moving, always changing, and always in a hurry, there is still such a thing as absolute, unshakable loyalty. Love is the only thing that travels through time. So, my dear ones, as we close this tale, think of Barnaby. Is there someone you've been waiting for? Or someone who is waiting for you? Don't let 20 years pass before you go home. Tell them you love them today. Because time is short, but love is forever. Now, join our family. Don't let another second pass without clicking that subscribe button. We have so many more tales to share, and we don't want you to miss a single one. Subscribe now and become part of our village. I'll see you in the next story. Thank you for being here with me. Stay gentle, stay loyal. Good night, world. Farewell. Sleep well. Farewell.